The new business is the recommendation that the Board of Education adopt a revised 2018-2019 budget of $164,351,527 by making the following reductions to the previously adopted 2018-2019 Board of Education budget. That line item is 5111, Department Supervisor salaries at $130,000, and line item 5112, teacher salaries at $70,000. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Second. Discussion?
I don't know if you want to, just general background with this cut. These are both positions that weren't filled this year, so we'll continue them, but this is not a vote to cut the positions. This is a vote to keep the positions in the budget but not fund for another year. Just this year, we froze them. And I do want to say that I spoke with, and I want to thank publicly Megan Zingle, our World Language Department Supervisor, who this year and next year have been doing really the work of two and trying to keep the language department moving in the proper direction. With the language department, it is a K-12 department, so that's a lot of teachers there, which means our principals are picking up more of the evaluation load from her, and we're going to probably augment a little more secretarial support next year for her than she got this year, just to help with all the paperwork that comes. And you'll see from the hiring process that she has just the business, and I really appreciate Megan's support and willingness to keep moving forward and working hard for West Hartford. She's done a great job. So.
Questions? I have one question.
Thanks, Tom. Megan, is she acting as a supervisor and teaching?
No, she's just supervising at this
Okay,
point. Yeah.
great. It wasn't our plan to leave this slot open for another year. Can you describe for us some of the impact that it has for another year? You mentioned some already, but on the teachers and the students as well, please.
Yeah, it's one of those items where you hope to keep any cuts as far away from the classroom with the kids, but we're at the point, as I've said, that when we're making cuts, there's going to be some impacts. I think that the biggest impact is maybe in overall long-range planning, that the department's it's not as easy to come together and have group meetings with Megan there expressing her vision with the people. I think there's an element of, just getting back to people when you're only one as opposed to splitting between the two sides of town. And she's spread thin. So I think that's what the teachers would feel. I don't know. I can't say that the students feel in that they don't know what they'd be feeling. You know what I mean? Because it's not a known opposite on that. It's something that certainly we believe in the position and want it out there because I think it would enrich our language department. We've added Chinese. We're expanding it through our middle schools. We keep adding Chinese teachers, which anytime you have that, there's an offset because the increase in Chinese, you're going to see a decrease in students taking other areas. And so that kind of push-pull, there's a little bit more mobility with teachers that maybe used to be in one building and now are moving between a couple buildings to meet needs. So there's just, it's a difficult time for it. It's not something I'm thrilled with, but at the same time, we have been able to operate this year with it. We'll be able to operate next year with it, but it's something I'd certainly support keeping the budget. I'm glad we're doing it this way where it stays, but the financing doesn't.
Just quick question for me, Tom. Since it's a year long, how will you evaluate or monitor during that 12-month period? Because I know things are shifting.
Yeah. Paul meets regularly with Megan as far, not just individually, but also with the large department supervisor group. And we'll continue to look at, there are certain things that Megan would like to be doing. We'd like to there's not to get too far into the weeds, there's a bilingual certification that the state created, we talked about at the end of last year, that a lot of our students already meet the requirements to be certified as bilingual. Megan's long had goals actually to increase, I don't want to say testing because that's not really the thought, but kind of certification when somebody's finished at the high school level to show just their fluency level. So that's something that, I'm not sure it's going to be next year, but it's something still in plans for the future. Because teachers, we need training on that, and it's a kind of a longer range plan.
Good evening, Lorna. Are we ready for the vote? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any abstentions? No. Okay, so the vote carries.
Thanks, Chip.
The next item of business is staff communications and reports, and so we'll hear from our esteemed superintendent.
Okay, well, interesting afternoon today, certainly, and when people's phones start going off with a tornado warning, as you can imagine, especially when it's a time when buses are out and it leads to concern for people. I want to thank our administrative team and the work they did, Andy Morrow, in terms of getting in touch with people, our principals that are here, because there's things like an AP review session. Well, you don't want kids out on the road, AP exam that's ending at 4 o'clock today, and communicating with kids is the time you get home. Just go home, and trying to make sure we keep kids safe at a situation like that. And where some would say, well, right now, why don't they go out right now? We still don't have power at 2 of our schools. And so, damage reports, it doesn't seem like West Hartford got a lot of damage in comparison to other places, but it's still something where, waiting to hear a little bit more from police and Department of Public Works, but it seems like we're in good shape. No anticipated problems with opening tomorrow at both of those schools. Power should be on if it's not on already at this point. So a few updates on things. You have we sent you an invitation over the weekend to our Veterans Recognition Ceremony, not just veterans, but our students that are entering the military as part of their postgraduate plans for high school. It's one of the great events that we do in West Hartford, and that will be Tuesday, the 29th, the day after Memorial Day, and it will be in our town hall, right in town hall. And it is one of the great ceremonies that we do, and you're all cordially invited to that. June 6th, Morley is coming up on their 90th anniversary. So Morley's 90th birthday will be June 6th, and Ryan Cleary's opening the building to parents and alumni to visit and share memories, people that went to school a long time ago. Charter Oak did this as part of their shift to the new building. Morley will be doing it. Community assembly on June 6th should be a special day to say happy birthday to Morley, a school that is, beloved by that community. So Morley parents will be out in force, I'm sure. And I'm going to mention it quickly, and then I'm going to let Dave, because he has a lot of information that I want him to share firsthand. Essentially, Ellington, we talked before about the Hall Jazz Band, the Hall Concert Jazz Band. They did a great performance, and I'll let Dave talk about more. I just want to give a few shout-outs, specifics. Outstanding saxophone section, outstanding trombone section, outstanding soloist Gavin Gray for bass, outstanding drummer Toby Siegel, outstanding soloist Mike Barrell for baritone saxophone, honorable mention soloist trombone Eli Henyon. So just the work that they did to perform in that setting, and then to listen to Wynton Marsalis, congratulations to Hall. King Philip in more music news. King Philip Singers, Bowstrings, and Sixth Dimension all won the Platinum Award this past weekend at the Great East Music Festival. And to have your different musical groups all be adjudicated as the best ones there, because that's what the platinum means, is really great. And just congratulations to all of those tremendously talented kids. Around town on Main Street, not sure if you walked down, you saw the banners, student banners that were hung representing artwork from different schools, along with the Department of Public Works. And the banner contest winner, Tricia Bolton, grade 10, her final banner will be 3 foot by 24 feet long and will be hung throughout the year at the Town Green, at DPW, and at the Recycling Center. It'll rotate between those areas. So congratulations. And then finally, I do want to publicly recognize both principals are here tonight, and they'll be talking about the discipline school climate report. But and they would both give credit to all of our schools. But the U.S. News and World Report rankings, one of the things I really like about the way the U.S. News and World Report does the rankings, and we can, you can do a lot of different ways to rank a high school. This one does take into account not test scores. It does take that into account in terms of your SATs and otherwise, and participation rates, but it also takes it into account, do you open up challenging courses to all of your students? And do you engage with them so that they take part in those courses? And for our little town, which it's 60,000, but it still feels like a little town a lot of the time. And for both of our high schools, which are comprehensive high schools, which are not, we're inviting you into this school, or we are asking you to take a test to be in this school. For both of our high schools, we win gold medals, of which 500 are given nationally. To be gold medal high schools is remarkable. And when you take into account, if you took out all of those selective schools and everything else, they're amongst, at worst, the 250 comprehensive high schools that all kids go to from that community that won this. I looked through, other than a city like Phoenix, Houston, or New York, you don't find another community where both high schools are on it, certainly not in Connecticut. It's interesting that even nationally, Hall is 443, Conard is 444, so right next to each other as our two principals often are. So it is tremendous. When you take a look at the Connecticut rankings, one of the things I shared with our teaching staff, if you look at most efficient cost per pupil expenditure for Conard and Hall, it's $15,761 per student in West Hartford. The average of the rest of them are over $20,000 per student per year. When you look at diversity and percentage of student body from a diverse background, Conard and Hall are at 36%, and then the average of the rest is at 14%. And then students receiving free and reduced lunch, Conard 24 and 17, the average of the rest is at 5% of those schools in Connecticut. So tremendous work. Both high schools deserve a lot of credit, and they'll be the first to say that credit has to be shared with all of the schools, because a student doesn't come into school just ready to jump into those classes. They have to have the background, they have to have the desire, and really I want to thank the students that agree to challenge themselves. And the one thing I say when people say, well, it's often, well, there's somebody in this class that maybe they're not prepared for yet. Well, if I still maintain, if we have 84% of our kids going to college, why wouldn't we want them to take a college course in a safe environment in their high school before they go there, so they see what they're going into? So I really want to congratulate both high schools, and I know staff is excited, and parents that I've spoken to are excited, and it's a good validation for our community. And lastly, good luck. We're about halfway through AP exams, and I talked to Grace and emailed Maddie. I know both of them thought, I'm sad not to come, but I'm glad to have a little more time to study as those AP exams are going on right now at our schools. So with that, things are moving forward. Graduation is inexorably marching closer. So that's that.
Okay. All right, so we'll move on to the next agenda item. which is the staff reports and board discussion, safe school climate, and discipline report. That will be presented by Dr. Andrew Morrow, Mr. Dan Satoon, Mr. Julio Duarte, and Mr. Eric Dempsey.
Good to see you all on a fun evening here. As Tom mentioned, we're still waiting on power status for Northfield and for Hall, but the workers are there, and we're working with Eversource hopefully to get an estimate this evening to get power restored. This is, as you know, our annual report on discipline and suspensions, and I want to start off by talking about how really every incident is significant to us and important to us because it involves a student, and it involves communication with that student and communication with that student's family. We recognize that kids make mistakes, and at all of our schools we focus on behavior regardless of the label or the category. We address negative behavior in any form, and we encourage and we model positive behavior. Part of being in school is being able to learn and reinforce that positive behavior. This is more than just the numbers in a one-time report. It's also important to remember that the positive climate that these gentlemen and all of our principals work hard to build every day in all of our schools. And Dan and Julia will be sharing some of these programs that we have in a minute. To start off on the report, I just wanted to hit a couple of the highlights of this and then have them talk a little bit about some of the programs that they've been putting in place. As you can tell by the first chart, which outlines the serious offenses that are the ones that we're required to, as you know, on an annual basis, report to the state, the overwhelming majority of West Hartford students conduct themselves safely and appropriately and contribute to a safe learning environment. We have had this year 175 suspensions for serious infractions as defined by the State Department of Education and listed here. 69% of these are served in school, with the remainders being out of school suspension. We've had 4 verified cases of secondary bullying and 4 of at the elementary level. And this year we've had 3 expulsions that are currently either receiving instruction at home or in our alternative educational program. As you know, each school has a Safe Climate Committee, which we've talked about in the past, which is made up of teachers, administrators, parents, resource officers, and at the high school level involves students as well. And this group meets and reviews data and environments in their school. They review discipline data, they review data from lockdown drills, from safety drills, and different scenarios. This is an ongoing process to identify trends and put specific interventions in place as needed. If you look ahead, one of the things we also go ahead and do with this group, and when we meet with administrators as well, is we look at suspension rates by different trends, and one of the trends is looking at it by race or ethnicity. And in addition to incident monitoring in schools, we analyze discipline data by grade and by race to try and identify trends and concerns that we have. And, you know, we're not where we need to be on this. You know, we're significantly better than the state average for this, but our suspension rates for minority students, for Black and Hispanic students, still remain considerably higher than white students. And this racial disparity is a concern that we're addressing and we're highlighting. We're working with this, as you heard before from Gretchen and Paul when they gave an overview of the collaborative and proactive solution process. This is something we're working on for this as well. This is also really at the root of our ongoing cultural competency study and training that we're doing. Working with the EDC, working on the racial justice training, the ongoing work that you'll be hearing about next meeting from Rosina about the microaggressions awareness, the student-led CSIs that they've been running at the high school level where the students of color speak. We're going to also be continuing to examine the data, the policies, and our practice, both in our resource committees, but also then involving the EDC to see where we need to be doing better and where we can make changes to do better. one of the key points that I want to come across, developed, is that we're working hard in developing communication and community within our schools, because we believe that this is the key towards having safe environments. And I want to turn it over to for a second to Julio and Dan to share some of the programs and some of the activities that they've been working on in their buildings. Do you want to start us off?
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Morrow. So as Andy had suggested, we spend a lot of time, myself and my admin team, over the summer going over and really combing through all of the data from the Safe School Climate, both student lenses, parent lenses, and faculty lenses, and really trying to get a sense of, is there any outliers, or are there themes, things like that, that we really want to look at? And when I talk about the outliers, I really look at the discipline data. And so sort of over the summer, we had some ideas and things we wanted to look at, and we're trying to brainstorm how to address those. Then shortly after that, Abby Esposito, one of our social studies teachers who's really dynamic, came to me with an idea, a partnership that she was working on with UConn. So we actually ended up partnering up with Dr. Matoma, a professor there at UConn, and sent 2 busloads of students to the University of Connecticut. One, we were just in love with the idea of having some of our kids get on a college campus and experience that, get over to Gamble and just see that whole feel. But 2, the other piece of just actually hearing from a college professor, getting that atmosphere. And while they were there, they were really working on this whole skill set of sort of deliberation. And by that, I mean being able to run and have conversations with classmates, with adults, really looking at topics that maybe, I don't want to say necessarily controversial, but there may be difference of opinions, and sort of, rather than just arguing and shouting and not really hearing each other out, really taking the time to hear the different perspectives, to sort of look at what are the advantage of one perspective opposed to the other. And they really had some amazing training there, came back really energized, and we were sort of trying to figure, okay, what are the next steps? And our kids were so excited to do this and to really, they wanted to go all in. So they decided they wanted to do a whole school function with this. So we did a training with the faculty where they were able to sort of roll it out, or do a little soft rollout with the faculty in a safer environment. And then we actually did an entire whole school assembly where each homeroom, and actually Grace was one of our moderators, went to a homeroom or one of our advisories, and they held about a 45-minute discussion. The topic this year had to do with what's the purpose of education. And so really sort of having these interesting conversations and hearing the different perspectives from students. And you know, you sort of, when you implement a program like this, for me, I go out in the hallway and I like to stand at what I call our 4 corners and kind of just hear what's the buzz, you know, and that'll tell me right away, was it successful or maybe a flop? And it was just interesting to watch as kids walked by, still wanting to have these conversations, wanting to continue them, and really sort of then meeting with the moderators and saying, boy, that was just such a great program. We need to do more of that. To be able to have us just sort of have students and adults sit down, have conversations, and hear, okay, your perspective may be different than mine, and some of it has to do with your life experiences. Tell me about them. And sort of hearing that out, and really sort of as we reflected and as we've heard from our students was, sort of where the world was and all the different activities and things that they were hearing in the news, this was really the skill set they thought was critical. That they wanted to continue to work on. So we were really proud of that effort. It's something we're certainly going to continue. We'll look at what are the next steps for that, but I know that was one of the pieces. It really was very student-led. You know, it was an idea that we had. A teacher really ran with it, a great partnership with UConn, but then all students, and they were the ones in the classrooms. They were the ones running it. And even when difficult sort of topics came up, it was just amazing to watch them sort of take the lead on that, and to be able to sort of encourage, you know, classmates for, give me a deeper understanding of where you're coming from, and what some thought might have been difficult conversations and would have caused all this conflict was actually the opposite. It really helped bring the community, I think, closer at Conard. And really even kids saying to me, boy, I never knew this, or never thought of that perspective of how someone may look at that problem. And so for us, it was really, and especially for me, sort of a light bulb moment and wanting to continue with that sort of great work. So that was one of the things that we did, and we'll continue to look at those pieces as we move forward. But that was one that I did want to share with folks.
Thanks. And, you know, once again, just to piggyback on a lot of the ideas that Julio was sharing is, you know, the idea of it, whenever we can empower the students, whenever we can give them that voice, I think it helps give them that feeling of that this is, you know, their school, and they're not just having to attend and just, you know, follow what the adults say. And so one of the things that we did at Hall that we talked about is during our CSIs, when we were focused on the culturally competence, is having different groups come in and speak to the faculty. So really, once again, it was the students kind of sharing their voice, their experiences at Hall High School with the staff. And so, we had our ELL students, we had our LGBTQ students, and we also had our students of color who comprised of Asian, Hispanic, and African American students. And so we broke them into smaller groups, and they had an opportunity to just really share with the staff in a very safe environment what their experiences were when a teacher says something that maybe the teacher's not aware of, how it might make a student at the school feel. And, they worked with some of the members that we have of our Cultural Competence Committee to kind of talk to them. And because, as you can imagine, even for a student to talk in front of 20 teachers at first is kind of very daunting and very scary. And so we kind of worked through that, and they were able to get very comfortable and share those experiences. And we had a lot of our staff kind of share how, to hear that voice, to get that perspective was very powerful for them. And it gave them just a sense that, it gave them a perspective that they hadn't heard in a while. And so what we hoped is not only just within that forum, but that it works twofold. That one, that maybe the teachers make it more of a point within their classes day to day to kind of stop and ask the students and have those kind of, maybe mini forums throughout the year, but also for the students to feel, wow, that wasn't so bad. The teacher didn't, bite my head off, or, whatever they might think. And sometimes, in those teenage minds, they think like the worst is going to happen, and they're like, oh, that wasn't so bad. Or, wow, they really heard me. And so the more we can do that, because I think while obviously it's so incredibly important, the work with, Eric and Andy, are doing with, changing the front of the building, at the heart of school safety and the heart of school climate is going to be the relationships that we have with our students. And that's always going to be the most important factor that's involved, the relationships that they have with the adults. Do they trust us that they can share things with it? Because they have 1,500 sets of eyes. They're seeing those things, and if they can trust us that we want to do what's in the best interest of them and the safety of the individual student and the school as a whole, then they can come to us, and now we can do that. We can do that work together, and so that's always going to be critically important. So whenever we can give them that voice, it's essential.
Absolutely, and it's actually a great segue. One of the key things that we have been focusing on is the relationships in the buildings, and how that's really one of the key. We talked about our safety and our security plans really in three different areas. We talk about buildings and technology, the physical things that we've done to buildings. And we've done, over the past 5 years, millions of dollars of improvements to our building to harden different areas as we've seen gaps in certain areas, to put programs in place to eliminate keys and so forth. We also, though, focus on the relationships and the collaboration that we have with students and with staff, and how we help not only with their ongoing training, but how we help to make them feel comfortable as agents in the building in possible scenarios. And Eric has done a fantastic job going to the different staff meetings and talking about different situations and talking about scenarios and really just answering their questions, as we've done with the PTC. Dave was a part of that with the PTC, as we've done with different PTOs. We actually started the morning this morning at Charter Oak in their faculty meeting, giving an overview of lockdown and some of the different changes and some of really the challenges of securing a round building, which in hindsight, And then the last piece when we talk about a three-part plan is our collaboration with West Hartford Police and those close relationships that we've put in place there, the ongoing training that we do. So I'd like to turn it over to Eric and have him talk really about those three areas for us.
Sure, good evening. As Andy touched upon, we continue to foster our strong working relationship with the West Hartford Police Department. They are in our schools every day, teaching our students different safety mechanisms. They're here, they attend every single one of our drills. They've been accompanying me as we go around to all our district staff meetings. educating our staff on expectations during school emergencies. One of the other things we've been working on this year is finishing up our camera project, our video surveillance project. Every time we take on new technology in the security field, we have to have the IT support to back it up. Our IT department's been very instrumental in helping us with that, fixing some of the shortcomings we've had, and we're learning as we move along, but the project is going very swiftly. We finished up both high schools now and the middle schools as well, finished up the exterior cameras. As I mentioned, the IT department before, we recently just dropped off yesterday, as a matter of fact, iPads to the West Hartford Police Department. They can now monitor events real time inside of our schools from the field. They could also monitor from inside their front desk and their dispatch centers, should an event occur inside the school, that they could watch remotely. I'm a big fan of keeping, as Dan touched upon, students active and engaged in our drills. I know, Dave, you attended one of our drills and you got to see that firsthand. We don't want kids to be, anxious during drills. We want them to be, feel invested in the security process and know what to do. We just conducted a drill today at one of our elementary schools where we had 6, students engaged in the drill. They got to be role players in the hallway and participate, and the feedback has been very positive as a result from seeing it from the other side of the, from the outside the classroom looking in. So we've been very successful with that. We started implementing also tabletop exercises at some of our safety meetings, which has been very great. It's just an easy way to brainstorm. We did one at Conard a couple weeks ago, and it received great feedback. We have all of the participants come to the table, and I gave them a particular scenario, and everybody kind of brainstormed, discussed, how they would handle that scenario. It took about half an hour, and I think it was very successful. And we'll talk about, I have some show and tell. One of the other things we've introduced in working with the West Hartford Police Department is our bleed control kits. As part of an overall comprehensive security plan, we have to plan for the worst case scenario. Bleed control kits are the newest thing. The Stop the Bleed is the campaign that's out there. It's not just used for God forbid an active shooter, but if there's any sort of traumatic injury, that they could be out there. I remember when AEDs first got, were new, and now they're in the shopping malls, you see them everywhere. This is the next evolution in the medical phase, and the school nurses have been trained in tourniquet application. We're hoping to get out and train teachers as well in tourniquet application. It's something that can be used not only in the school, but it's something used in, in real life as well, and they can carry out into the field. Do we want to pass that around too, or show the, it's right behind, right there if you want to see the kits. This is one of our kits. We have our larger kits that are in the high schools and the middle schools. We have smaller kits for the elementary level. But there's basic tourniquet, chest seals, gauze, everything you would need to, potentially save a life in a crisis situation.
One of the things that Eric touched a little bit upon with West Hartford Police, but I do want to emphasize, because I do think it just shows the level of the collaboration and how there really is a connection there. We had an incident about a month and a half ago at one of our schools where there was a student who was in crisis, and there was a miscommunication with a police officer who arrived, and again, oftentimes police officers are problem solvers, and his goal was to solve the problem, and in doing so, he created some miscommunication and so forth. He absolutely followed the rules, did everything appropriately. I'm not disparaging in any way, but in doing so created some questions that we had about how can we work better. And so Eric and I actually talked with Chief, and then talked with Brian Wallace, who's one of their training coordinators, who's also been working with us on the bleed control kit. And we had great meetings involved some of our special education supervisors about how do we enter into a situation and understand a child's baseline and understand what really is behavior that's outside of their norm, And they're very interested in that because, again, they want to do what's best for everyone, and they don't want to be in a situation where, in hindsight, there was miscommunication between a school staff and their staff. And so I've been very encouraged by how much really they want to help with that, and we're going to actually put some materials together and work in the fall when they start up their next training cycle for officers and be involved in that as well, to really help them on that side as much, hopefully, as they've tried to help us on the physical security piece, which I thought was a good connection there as well.
Yeah. You know, one of the things that's a necessary shift that's occurred just in my evolution since I've been in central office and looking at school security is, you know, we didn't want to disrupt routines. We didn't want to disrupt days. We didn't want to create tension necessarily with kids or with staff. And now we know we have to. And you can't be at one of Eric's presentations or anything in a school and not put yourself into the situation of what could happen. It's emotional for some people. There's pushback that they say you shouldn't have this, you shouldn't do this. And it's just, I wish we didn't have to prepare, but we do. And the most difficult thing for teachers, no matter how we train them, no matter how we go through everything with them, they're going to have to make decisions in that situation for their children. And it's a tall order to put forth for them. And I appreciate their openness when Eric goes into the buildings to talk to them. But it's really always going to be up to our kids and our teachers and how well they communicate with each other. And it does go to the things Julio and Dan were talking about and Andy mentioned, because the best way to prevent anything, and something we've certainly seen an increase in, is a heads up. I mean, I know we've heard this discussed during the year. If kids see something online, I mean, we've had a lot this year where at 10 or 11 at night, Andy and I get texts or a call from the police, they're saying this, and then you go into it, it's like, well, no, that's a school in Minnesota, or it's one of the spamming where it's 95 schools, and so there is no threat, but it takes a while to find through. But kids and their families are letting us know ahead of time when they hear of something, which is great.
Which is great, so, absolutely. What questions can we answer?
I know we have a new facility at the American School for the Deaf. Can you talk about the transition or how we're applying, the drills, rally points, cameras, access, and things like that to the new facility?
Actually, you want to talk about that? Because aren't you going there tomorrow to meet with them at Strive?
Yeah, the same program that I was just at Charter Oak with this morning, and we've gone to almost all the schools now and spoken with them. I'm actually going to be at the Strive program tomorrow, meeting with them as well. Going over a lockdown in conjunction with the West Hartford Police Department. That'll be with us as well to train them. They're a different building. They're on the ASD campus, so there's some different security protocols they have to follow, with ASD as well. So it's a joint partnership. But we are going to be meeting with them tomorrow to conduct training, and we do actually have a drill scheduled very shortly thereafter in conjunction with the ASD security department as well. So we are meeting with them and training with them.
So it's really twofold with them, because we do not only our own building specific pieces, but we also do as a campus wide with ASD.
Implementation of a system for cameras and things like that, or like a communication system, anything planned? Because I know that we've been investing in the high schools and the schools, and it's just another campus, so just curious.
Yeah, our goal is, as we've been working with them and identifying different needs and such, that they'll be outfitted like the other schools with the external cameras and possibly the internals. We're not quite sure on where we would need internals. It's not very big, as you know, but absolutely.
Do we have a process in place by which parents and families would be alerted by text or phone call? Is that I assume there's some sort of a policy guide on how the schools would alert families if there were an unfortunate situation.
Yeah, and if there was something that required absolutely that certain notification, that's part of our, we talked about in the past, as you know, our emergency manuals, emergency procedures are in each school, and also each teacher has them available, as do administrators, as the app we've shared in the past. That has reunification procedures on there, and it differs based on what it would be, but there's procedures then for how parents would be notified, where parents would be told, depending on different schools, where parents would be told to perhaps meet, as buses would then take students to them to reunify with parents.
I'm actually really glad you brought that up, Deb, because it is important for parents to understand what the media writ large choose to run with sometimes in terms of lockdown. This school's under lockdown, and we'll start getting phone calls, and no, it's a secure the school. There's a bear a quarter of a mile away, or there was a robbery, and this is not a lockdown. This isn't. So, and then in those cases where it's not an immediate, we follow up with a letter and a communication home, or a phone call sometimes, communication. This happened to your school. Anytime there's something like that. If there were ever something that went on that was a lockdown, an emergency situation, we have the capacity, as everybody knows, and we do have it in our plans, to communicate. And that's the levels of planning, where if it were something, it wouldn't be Julio if it were something at Connor, because Julio's busy with exactly what's happening at that point. Then it shifts to Andy or to myself. There's 3 tiers of following through how that communication goes out. How immediate does that communication go out? So and even now, we don't notify people of lockdowns, because how good is a drill if we say, this is a drill coming up, and then we do it, which means that there's a text, kids text right away, we're in lockdown, and so the principals both deal with phone calls immediately when that happens, and the communications, no, this is a drill at this point, where, you'll hear it in the office as the phones start ringing. So I'm glad you asked the question, because it is important to note that we will let people know, and we have that protocol in place that if there is an emergency, parents will know.
To follow up on that same question, it's so actually kind of relevant today. When there was an email sent out about whether we were going to have a meeting or not, and by no means is this any criticism, but only 2 responded, because emails almost, so when you say you communicate, I guess I would say that in an important event, right, in an emergency, I think emails only is like secondary.
No, email absolutely is. The communication tonight was just,
of course,
FYI.
No, and I just, I never would have even brought that up until.
No, exactly. No, in an emergency situation. So,
something in text, right?
We have both the capacity for basically, when it's emergency communication from Andy that goes out, so you get a snow call, we're not hitting emergency. When we're hitting emergency, you get email, you get phone call, you get to anything that we have, it goes out immediately to every action.
Right.
It also goes to every number we have for you. There's a difference between our outreach and our emergency.
Yeah, okay, good.
Yeah.
Hey, thank you so much. Appreciate it. I was just thinking, Andy and Eric, you did a great job talking to the Parent-Teacher Council and explaining how things go. Sometimes if the students are out on the field at recess or lunchtime, and if there were an emergency, it doesn't make sense to go back into the building, and the teacher has to make the decision, and you gotta make your best decision is to run. I think of some of the bigger schools, well, they're all pretty big, but I think of Duffy, for example, with such a large field, or Whiting Lane. Do the students know, do they practice, what's our plan after we run? And you don't have to, of course, give away anything.
No, we absolutely do. And that's one of the things we've really added in the last couple of years, is doing drills during recess, doing drills during lunchtime, doing drills when there's PE outside, and having teachers and students recognize, where do I go into the tree line? Once all clear, how do I get back safely into a building? Or how do I stay out and how do I then communicate that to the office? And so that is something that we work on. Do you want to add?
We do have primary and secondary locations to go to also. That's information we don't share for a reason, but each building has a primary, you're leaving here, where are you going? And then a secondary, we can't go there. And I always think of that with something like,
That's more of if we had to evacuate.
Gas
students
leak.
because of
that's
a
like,
gas
yeah,
leak or
84,
something.
there's a chemical truck
Yes.
that overturns, and the schools that are by 84, okay, where are they going?
But we
Okay,
actually
that.
go ahead and actually take staff and make sure that staff know how would we walk students to those different locations. Once we got to that location, where would we secure students safely and reunify with parents? So all of that is something that we work on.
Great. Thanks. Another question I have, and I'm hesitant here because I'm worried that I know I read this online. I believe it was a reputable site, but if it's an urban legend, please just tell me to stop. But I'd read that, you know, the HIPAA laws are very strong as far as patient confidentiality if you're in a hospital or something like that. And I'd read that there was at least one Parkland student where the administration wasn't aware that that student had been injured in the attack and was in the hospital. I don't know if that's the case. If that's true, again, I'm going to give that disclaimer. But do we have procedures in place to check on every student after a certain incident to make sure they're accounted for?
Absolutely. Yes, that's part of our planning.
Great, thank you.
So also relevant today, I had to pick my daughter up from practice, and I was impressed. She says, "Oh, Dad, you know, we had to, you know, they had everybody out there on golf carts and such." So, you know, didn't even really think of it. Yeah, storm. I don't know. Maybe I just kind of lackadaisical about it, but yeah. So you know, getting people home and such, and I thought it was it was relevant for today, obviously, and I applaud you guys because, you know, this is only a sophomore talking, but she said it was, you know, impressive and that you know, care was taken. So kudos. And who's got bragging rights this year for the best school? Which one is it? I'm just a hall dad. I'm just asking.
Look at Julio's face.
That's why I didn't sit next to him, Mark.
You know, I do want to say I appreciate you saying that, but like any other day, it was a good drill today because this isn't something that typically happens here with severe thunderstorm, tornado warnings. So we learned, we were writing things down at the end of the day. Okay, well, this, you know, this communication, because we also have the we programs in our building that we don't supervise, and okay, you want to be supportive of them. And there were just things that came up that were, okay, I hadn't thought of that necessarily in this situation that are good learning points.
So, you know, just throw a military hat on, you know, you practice and you train for all kinds of scenarios, and you never get the exact scenario, right? And there's, you know, a famous statement that the Russians used to say, you know, the U.S. military is the most difficult to fight because they never follow their manuals. And, you know, where the Russians just followed their manuals and that was it. And the U.S. Army always had the flexibility as those were the manuals, but the guidance that they can give from the experience that they had, so for different scenarios. So you might have a 1 bear protocol, and there might be 5 bears, but you're going to be able to react. So, because of the training, so it's good stuff.
We'll make sure to add that as a tab for in the next book.
Good evening. Thank you again for the information. Just some question to elaborate on regarding the rates for suspension based on race and ethnicity. And I very much appreciate you describing the sensitive nature of it and also wanting to look at the clear disparity and try to get a better understanding and to address it. My question is, I understand, or I'm assuming, that there are pretty concrete and objective measures that determines what rules suspension and what does not rule. My question is, going even before the objective is met, how it is met. Is it more subjective in terms of how the observer sees or views, or are there objective kind of guidelines that they must follow that ultimately determine that, yes, a violation was met?
That's hard to answer because it's not always as concrete as that. I think that in some cases there are very specific steps that we work on and take. I think in other cases, if a student is involved in a confrontation with another student in a hallway that winds up punches being thrown, etc., that's pretty clear cut as far as a violation and a response goes for that. But in each of the cases, we sit down, the assistant principals, the principals sit down and really try to understand what led to that and where the points were along the way that perhaps different choices could have been made, and make sure that the student's able to understand that as well. I think that's part of our really understanding what's these triggers, what are the antecedents here.
And Julio and Dan, do you want to talk about your weekly meetings with your assistant principals where you're not just live in the moment talking with each other, but how you review your own data?
Yeah, and I would say it's actually, it's one of the things that sometimes I take for granted having two high schools in town, to be honest with you, because it's rare that a day goes by that actually I don't call Dan or Dan calls me to say, hey, what do you think? And we get to sort of run those scenarios through. But as Tom was mentioning, I meet with my admin team every Monday morning, so that's actually how we start the week, and we'll go over just typical calendars and things. But then one of the things that we like to always do is sort of do a scenario piece, or bring something that happened during that following week to sort of look at those pieces. And again, I think the goal there is to look at a trend. Are there trends? And then also to look at, are we doing everything we can to be proactive? And I think for us, that's always, when I sit there and now we're dealing with discipline, I'm always trying to reflect on, could I have prevented this? Is there anything that I could have done or the school could have done or anything? And that's really led to a lot of some of the programs we've got, some of the different interventions, and oftentimes, again, sharing ideas with the other side of town and saying, hey, have you had things like this? What have you done? Or I've noticed that your numbers in this are really lower than ours. Are you doing certain programs that you find are being successful? I think, as Andy said, though, the biggest thing for us is really not shying away from the data, and really looking at it and saying, okay, here's what it is. And even with my faculty, I'll show our discipline numbers. And, that's how I sort of end my year, actually, is by going over all of the data, looking at all of our safe school climbs, all that again. And I'll have a whole worksheet out. We have tables. I'll put teams together, and I'll say, I want you to look through this and come up with some ideas of what we need to do differently, because we acknowledge there's an issue. So let's not pretend it's not there. Let's really address it. And we've actually had some really good things come from faculty, and I'll do the same with students as well, with my principals advisory committee, and asking them, are you seeing things, or do you have ideas? So that's sort of some of the proactive things that we're trying to do.
Yeah, and we're pretty much, on point with that. The calibration exercises that we do often, which is, hey, how would you handle this situation? How would you handle this situation? And looking for that, in those weekly meetings where, the assistant principals will talk to each other. And sometimes they're just even, you don't even wait for the weekly meeting. Shelley Solomon will sometimes just go right next door to Kim Ambrose and say, hey, have you had a situation like this? Just want to calibrate. Or, is this a 2 hour or 4 hour? Is this, 4 hours is in school? And looking to see how those situations are, and really kind of working through there. And then a lot of it too, and I believe we've worked very hard to make progress in is, two students get into a fight, typically, they have the kind of that set suspension that's there, but trying to really reduce those levels of where it's a student starts with, multiple tardies and it goes to an after-school detention, and then they miss that detention, so then they get another detention, and then it be, and just keeps spiraling, and trying to work with those students to say, that's silly, although, I don't want to minimize being tardy to class, but it's silly now that somehow this has led now to an in-school suspension for there. And how do we work with that student? And sometimes it's just through the conversations, through developing the relationships, that you find out that the student needs to get home right after school to help a younger sibling, get off the bus, and so they won't. And you might not get that from the student. Once again, we always take for granted that we think the student's just going to say, Mr. Zatoon, I can't do it after school because I have to get the help. They won't. They just kind of just keep going, and then it's involving, whether it's the counselor or involving the parents, say, hey, can you help me, because right now Dan's just not serving, and I don't want him to get an in-school suspension. So what can we do? And, a lot of times we work with the parents, and parents are like, oh, I'll take care of that. I'll get home early from work tomorrow, and he'll serve it tomorrow, and it's done. And we wow, that was really simple. And we could have, and so more of those types of, working together as a team, working together to try to find those solutions. So I call them the silly ones, I'm like, you're doing a day of in school for this? Like, how did it get to that point? And trying to get it, to prevent it from getting to that level. Obviously, there's this, safety things, whether it's the fighting or the drugs, that those are more typical as far as kind of the suspensions or trying to follow along state statutes and guidelines and things. But it's the ones that, for us, that we try to feel are preventable, that we really work hard toward.
I think one of the things that changed since I've started teaching here in the 90s to now is, leading the league and kicking kids out of class is not a good thing. And this kind of, I'm turning discipline over to the assistant principals and the principals. Really, the way to prevent all that is, what's the relationship with the teacher like? And what's the teacher doing to have that conversation with that child? Because it's really happening in my class. I don't know. I've always believed, why would I turn over that relationship and that kind of give and take to Dan when I'm with them every day? Because it's not helping me if Dan now, there are situations where you certainly write somebody up or something, but I think the element of, okay, how are we working with our kids? And that goes back to Paul and Gretchen and what we're talking about, because this isn't just about high school, it's all levels, about making sure that we don't criminalize is the wrong word, disciplinize is the wrong word, but make behavior that is who they are, not something they've talked about why is this what I'm doing. And it starts with relationship and caring. So,
one of the things I just wanted to mention too is, because I think sometimes we lose sight of that, is when we're looking at discipline too, is really shifting it away and shifting those conversations away from just consequences and really looking at it from a clinical lens. And I got to give a lot of credit to Gretchen and her staff, our social workers, our school psychologists, our counselors, because we're doing a lot more of, when there is an issue, all right, let's go get that school social worker, let's get the counselor, and I want you to sit. And actually, we've even looked at being creative with the discipline, and saying, listen, instead of serving a 4-hour detention, I want you to go and have a session with your school counselor, and if they tell me that you're really engaged in that, like, to me, that's more meaningful. Because again, it's not, we're looking to try to stop the behavior, and we're trying to help students understand that. And so I think that's really been a shift for us. And even having the conversation with that student, saying, who is the adult in this building who you feel comfortable talking to? If it's not me, if it's not whoever it is, like, that's fine. If it's your coach, like, again, I don't care. I just want you to have someone here that you trust, and let's leverage that. And, even I think of Matt Sersosimo a lot of times, a football coach, having him come down and sitting with a kid that, we've been banging our heads against a wall trying to figure out, like, what works. And he comes in, and after one meeting, it's like behavior stopped, changed, and so looking at those sort of outside the box pieces, I think is something too that we work hard on.
Thank you all for elaborating on that, and I think it's very refreshing to know that there is an open-minded perspective in addressing these concerns. And I think unfortunately that is not always their approach that's taken outside of our community. And I think it's a reality that we must recognize that unfortunately there are situations where a person's behavior is judged for what it is just in that moment. You certainly have had many events that have happened in the past couple of months that have given evidence to that. So thank you for trying to not repeat those patterns of behavior and really recognizing that our young people are people and they behave for a reason and wanting to explore why those reasons are happening. So thank you.
Thank you. Just following up on in this line of questioning, I'm wondering if we have any data on trends on the suspension rates by race and ethnicity. Like, are we heading in the right direction in reducing disparities, or are things not improving year over year?
I think we're heading in the right direction. It's tough sometimes because the state changes sometimes the measures that they've been using on this, and so it's tough for us to look at apples to apples across the board. But I think from what the conversations we've had on a yearly basis and when we've been looking at the data, I do think we're headed in the right direction. I think there's more we need to be doing, but I think that the work that we're doing is acknowledging that and that we're making progress on it.
Okay, let me ask my question. We'll come back to you. So, great presentation. I loved it, and I especially loved the refreshing part where you're not just looking anymore to just discipline these kids, but you're going a little beyond that to find out what is the issue, where can we meet this child, and modify and change that behavior, which is excellent. And I love the piece about working with the families, because you're absolutely right. Depending on how old that child is or student is, they're not going to tell you what's going on. They're just not going to show up because they're not thinking about the consequences. And then when that occurs, it just becomes another layer of discipline. So really, thank you for that. I have a couple of questions. I want to go back to Julio and Dan when you talked about the experience with the students going to the colleges and then some of the things that you're doing at Hall. So one question is, how are those students selected?
So I can speak for us. So what we do is multiple sort of approaches. One is we'll sort of target certain courses, kids that are in our human rights class that we know sort of have, this is something they're passionate about. We'll reach out to our student council and things like that. And then the other thing we do is I'll ask teachers to tap people on the shoulder, or tap a student on the shoulder who is not on the list, but who they see as someone. And it's very much aligned, I think, with how we do our course recommendations and that philosophy of really needing faculty and really adults in the building to show a kid that they believe in them. And sometimes that tap on the shoulder saying, hey, did you even think that you should go on this program? And we actually found a lot of success with that, and students saying, I was thinking about it, but I didn't really think I was the material for that program, but since so-and-so told me, okay, I'll do it. And then they've got this sort of pride in it. Because again, for us, it's important when we run into these programs that it represents our student body. And so when we sit there looking at all the students that we're bringing, is it representative of our population and across the board, all of those things? So.
For me, it's very similar, but, in addition to that, there's always the, when the students approach me, it's careful what you ask for. I know, for example, we had two students, I'll just say Declan and Ella, who came to me last year, and they just wanted to express some concerns about student lockdowns and school safety and such. And I was like, no problem. I want to have you meet Eric Dempsey. And so we set up a meeting with Eric, and we came in, and then they were involved in our next lockdown. And so you really take the students who show that interest. We had a student who earlier in the year had sent me an email about wanting to do some things with, kind of school climate and stuff. So immediately, we responded, but then I said, oh, by the way, and I forwarded to Shelley Solomon, who oversees our Safe School Climate Committee. I'm like, we're going to put this student on the Safe School Climate Committee. And so when they express that interest, we want to take advantage of that. And so many times when they're like, oh, you're interested in school safety? We got some work for you to do. And to do to those people. And once again, when we find those students who are showing an interest and want to be active, we want to take advantage of that and bring them into the fold and give them, like I said, that voice to help contribute.
The other question I wanted to ask is, I noticed you partnered with UConn, and I know you partnered with some of the other colleges. How are we with partnering with some of the neighboring businesses? And the reason why I bring this up is I know a number of students at the end of their senior year, they may not be sure if they're ready to go on to college, or, whether it's community college or junior or 4-year, and they may want to go straight to work. So do we partner with any of the businesses just to teach about professionalism, how you network in a team and work, especially when you're coming straight out of high school?
It's interesting you say that, because tomorrow actually we have a relationship, and I believe Connor is participating too. If not tomorrow, at another time, we work with the Junior Achievement, and so we have a career walk. And so our students, a lot of our students will go down to West Hartford Center, and they stop at multiple businesses. And so, for example, they'll go to Charles Schwab, and the first person, the front office person there, or the greeter there, will talk to the student and say, here's my job, here's how I got into it, here is the level of education I got. And then you might get the brokerage manager, and he'll tell them about, here's what I do, and here's the education that I had. And then from there, the group will go to Max's Oyster, and then, the hostess will talk about their experience, and they'll go to the waiter, and then I'll go to the chef, and they'll go to the manager. And each of them share their experiences and what they do. and their levels of education. And so they do this career walk where they, hit 4 or 5 different, shops in West Hartford Center, and they really get to see, at Max's Oyster, one time I followed with them, and they got a tour of the kitchen and the back area and, the prep and everything in there. So it's just really for them to be able to see those various experiences, I thought was really powerful and really helpful for a lot of the kids to kind of also see the wide continuum of roles. It's not just, okay, here's a teacher, or here's, something that they might have a better idea. These are some of the maybe occupations or roles that they might not see, and then have a better understanding of what they would need to do to acquire those positions.
Yeah, Dan and I met actually this morning. We had this discussion about what's the future look like. And it's something that I think we have an opportunity. We've said that next year, one of the things this board will be looking at will be the credit requirements for high school, because we will have to. And so we should look at how can we use that to really engage our businesses even more than we do, so that we are providing that, whether it's a gap year, whether it is this is an option for a career and this is what it takes to get to that career, or making connections right now, because it's something that the difficulty with anything is right now we do it because we have good people that do it, I don't want to say on their own time, but as part of their function, but it's not their job. And so that's something really to look at, okay, well, how do we systematize it? I think is important.
And I have a question regarding the lockdown drills. So, and I'm sure they're time sensitive, and I'm thinking of the fire drills in terms of, do they have to be out within a certain period of time? And if they fall outside of that time, in terms of the deficiency, how is that then addressed for the next drill?
Each drill that we do, we bring, members of staff together. We fan out in the building, usually before the drill is conducted, and we watch from different angles. We don't always start from like the office and fan out, so we start from sometimes the outside and work our way in. And we watch to see how quickly staff responds, how quickly they can go into lockdown, close their doors, locks lights out of sight. One of the things we developed recently was an evaluation form that we complete at the conclusion of every crisis response drill, where we look at everything. If there's physical infrastructure, the PA system is working, student response. So at the end of every single drill that we do, we all meet back in the principal's office where we debrief and we look at ways to better ourselves and build and improve for the next drill. We do that at every drill at every school. And we do time them as far as the response, absolutely.
It's not a state guideline.
Correct.
The final question I have is around the suspensions in terms of the fighting and the altercation, in particular KP and Sedgwick. And I'm just curious if, I guess, how it's categorized, and are these repeat offenders in terms of students, or even repeat offenders in terms of teachers that are identifying these students who need further discipline type of behavior, whether it's suspension or expulsion?
Well, on that chart there, yes, indeed, there are repeat offenders for that. And so you may have one student who may have 3 instances for that, based on a pattern of behavior. And again, that goes to identifying the trend and looking at that when their team looks at that at Sedgwick, at KP, at Bristol, wherever, making sure then, okay, well, this seems to be the pattern. What resources can we bring to bear to help the student? Because again, we expect students to make mistakes. That's okay. But we expect them to learn from mistakes. And when we see someone making the same mistake again, clearly somehow we're failing to have that understanding with the student about what's going on. Why is it that you've now had this second instance here? And that's where we talk about different supports that we can put in place. That's when we make sure that we put safety plans in place to try and really circle around that instance so it doesn't become that definition of that child.
And I'm glad you brought that up, because if you look at 1700 and 1710, fighting altercation versus physical altercation, that can be a coding issue of how did you choose to code at 1700 or 1710. You kind of combine the two to really get the number you'd be really looking at. It goes to like the bullying. Like, I'm not embarrassed at just what the law defines when you say we had 4 confirmed bullying incidents. Well, remember what that means. That's the state definition of bullying, what goes into it, multiple, targeted, this. That doesn't mean kids weren't mean to each other. I mean, and that's what bullying is kids being mean to each other. It's just a question of, does it meet the state guidelines to be coded that way, which means it needs to be repetitive, it means to be targeted. And so that's where you get into that kind of, a parent calls and says, my child's being bullied. You don't say, oh, well, technically, since it hasn't been repeated yet, and it's just kind of, because it has to be documented, then documented repeatedly for it to be the state. That doesn't mean we treat the offense differently necessarily. Again, our number one goal, as I said, is to end that behavior. And so you try to think of things, okay, what will end this behavior? The coding isn't as important as other than state reporting.
Remember, we talked a little bit about that reporting coding in the past, and the one difference there, the 1700, meaning the way the state defines it is one participant received at least some type of minor injury. And if you remember, then we compared that with 1710, which involves a confrontation or tussle, but is broken up before a physical injury. And so, again, it depends on, so-and-so received a scratch or was pushed or hit in this, and it's really then how the school is addressing that.
I lied, I have one more question. And students, forgive me if you're at home watching this, but I'm curious because I know as students advance to their junior and senior year, sometimes they have a tendency, might not happen in our district, but leave school and then come back. And those doors, that are not the main entrances, sometimes are on the lookout and are kept open. Do we have cameras on all doors, or do we have cameras on certain areas of the school that are maybe high traffic areas, if you will?
Yes.
Oh.
We have full exterior cameras, so all of the doors are being covered. And that's not something that when we do see students leave during the day, if it's to go to a car or whatever, we make sure that those students are safe upon returning.
That's a tough one because it comes from do you not trust? I mean, somebody forgot something in their car. That happens. But it is, the door's propped open. I think kids understand to an extent why that can't happen anymore. But it's something we always have to make sure. And so there's building sweeps with security where that's part of their routine is going through the building, making sure there's not a prop that maybe the camera couldn't catch, right? I mean,
Hey, school climate surveys, as I recall from the email I got from Conard, they closed yesterday, is that right? Yes, and could you just remind us of the format for that? Something about state has certain questions and we can...
Yeah, the state for that, usually we present that as part of this, but because of the late start time presentation, that is at the next meeting, we moved this forward, and then because of we didn't want to conflict with the late start time survey, we've delayed sending some of those out at the other schools, and so we're still waiting to get those back from all the schools. Once we get that data back, we compile it and all of that, and I'll share that with you in the past. But if you remember, it usually shows a consistency from year to year in some of our larger results there. But we do have the ability, and what we do is we ask certain questions in that survey, and then the state requires there be certain questions that are asked in that survey.
Andy will compile a report on that, and I'll forward that report to
we'll
you just in a written
just like we've
form.
done in the past. It'll be
Right.
similar to what we've done in the past.
Curious, could questions be different on the Conard survey than the Hall survey, for example? Are they that customized?
They could be, but I don't believe we've done that. I think we've had a consistency of questions for that.
I think both Dan and Julio, and I evaluate both of them when we meet. When we meet, we go through what do the surveys say, what have you learned, and what will you share with them. And they don't compare like, well, Julio's at this number, that's not what the question is. but it does give context because, there's a time where you get it yourself and you're like, oh, 78% of the people think things are going well. That's pretty good. Well, it's not if 95% everywhere else are, and so there's that kind of calibrating that we look at district-wide, but these two are models in terms of leadership, in terms of sharing, and they will share anything that's a sunny report or a wart that they say, okay, well, what are we doing here? What do you think led to that? So, no, it's an important note that we all talk about that with each principal as we go through, okay, what is this saying about the year, and what are the things you're going to focus on next year based on this information?
The one point I will say, at least consistently, and, starting to look at some of the early returns of the data is how, especially now that both of us have, 4 or 5 years under our belt of looking at this data, how markedly overall similar our results are. Every once in a while there's a question where something might, there might be a blip here or there, but overall, we almost laugh, because at a certain point we'll collect it and then, we'll, throw it on the Google Drive and share it out, and we'll look and we're like, really, it's remarkable. And because once again, there are those, at the same time, there are the differences between the school and, even how we maybe run things and do things, but at the end, that how the results end up being, pretty similar. Thanks.
Sorry. Just going through the list of serious offenses in our booklet, another one that jumps out is drugs, alcohol, and tobacco. Obviously, at the high school level, this is a bigger issue than at the middle school level. And this is probably not a good question necessarily for tonight's meeting, but maybe for a future meeting, we could talk a little bit about the climate around vaping, alcohol, and drug use in the high
Absolutely,
schools.
yeah, absolutely. Actually, our numbers are down for those this year as opposed to last year at the schools, but absolutely, vaping is certainly a concern that we have, and it's something that the 4 of us, working with the assistant principals as well as some of our support staff, will be looking at closely.
The issue with vaping is how easy it is to get away with it. And we'll get people, I know, on both surveys, somebody will say, you should put surveillance cameras in the bathroom. It's like, are you sure we should do that? And then it kind of leads to this question where somebody could be vaping in this room and you wouldn't have known it. And so that is a problem that we all have had discussions in the past week about this, where it's, when we were in high school, smoking in the bathrooms, it reeked, and you knew there were bathrooms I wouldn't go near in my high school, and we had a nice period. Dan said today we had a nice 10-year period where it wasn't an issue, and now vaping certainly becoming an issue. I think the biggest concern is you talk to kids about it, they don't think it's dangerous. They don't think it's a health risk because it's better than cigarettes is the argument. So, yeah, it's something that we actually will be talking a lot more about this in the fall. We tend to have parent information nights and really try to engage with, I think we got to start with information on this one. Yeah.
So on the vaping, what's the tendency to have an illegal drug in there versus just I guess, tobacco? Because, again, that's, I know that there's an addictive component to nicotine and cigarettes, and so it comes with vaping, but, I guess you probably don't know the exact answer, per se, but, I mean, would you imagine, I guess, there has to be some sort of tendency that that's probably a trend, I guess. I'm looking for, not yes it happens or no it doesn't, but I don't know.
I think we were just talking, we've seen 2 or 3 this year that were using the different oils for that, yes.
I mean, I guess I wouldn't even know if you were using, is there a difference? Like, can you tell? Like, if that person is using that particular oil that has...
You'd only know by their medical reaction.
Right, you don't smell it, not like the
Well, or you would know if you found the vaping material and the oil and such.
Right, okay.
Which
So,
is
but
what
you
we
don't
had.
smell it?
Not, I mean, not to a great extent, not to a, oh, what were they doing there? Eric, do you want to,
Yeah, and now that with all the different fragrances, the bathrooms actually smell nice, but it's horrible. But sometimes there's an aroma. I think we did have one incident where there was a I think there was a field test. Even law enforcement was challenged to stay up with it nowadays, just a field test to see if there's a presumptive presence of THC in the oils as well. And I think one of the cases we had where there was a positive field test as a result of it. But it's a challenge with the vaping, just because of the way they're so heavily perfumed.
And I think Tom's message is really the best one, is we need to educate parents on it. It's just, we saw a situation where a kid bought it online, and literally he legally bought it, came to his house. And so trying to educate parents, like, are you aware of this? Because parents just aren't aware. And their packages come in, they go, oh, okay. So.
And even actually, I don't even say even the students aren't aware. I still can vividly remember a situation last year where a student was caught, and this is before it was those Juuls, but it had like the little bottle to fill it up, and the student was like, "Mr. Student, like, what's the big deal? There's nothing bad. It's like there's no nicotine in it." And I'm looking at the bottle, and on the bottom it says like 2% nicotine, and I'm like, "Can you just read this for me?" And he's like, "Oh," and it's just the willingness to put things in their body or consume things without really being, thoughtful or challenging, is startling sometimes. And so, like I said, that's really part of that role, educating the parents, but also even educating the student. We go back to that idea, Tom and I were talking about this today. They'll be like, well, it's better than smoking. It's like, well, when you see that statement, they're telling you that if you're a 3-pack a day smoker, vaping this is better than, taking 3 packs of Marlboros. But not, in isolation, it's not healthy for you. And so trying to get that message to them is challenging, because especially in day and age, as even Dave, when you talk about like the article of Heartland, you're not sure what they're quick to see something online and go, oh, it's got to be true. And so once again, more of the education of even questioning sources, questioning sites, questioning to look at the validity of those things is crucial for us to kind of hopefully get ahead of it.
I also want to sort of piggyback to where we started with our partnership with West Hartford PD and Amanda Martin, our SRO. She's a rock star. And when we saw some of this stuff coming up, she sat with me and we really sat down and sort of put together a PowerPoint, and she got some samples, and we did a whole thing for our faculty to show them, hey, here's what it looks like, because really our faculty had no idea. So here's what it looks like. We showed them a quick movie clip and actually went on, I think it was MapQuest, and just typed in like vape shop and like pinned every vape shop within like the Conard vicinity. And you could see like all these dots just to give, I think people an idea of here's what we're talking about. So again, that was just, I think, a really good partnership with West Hartford PD and with us.
So someone, maybe with your knowledge, Eric, or any of yours, if you had a vape pen with, maybe, I guess, 7 oils in front of you, without testing it, would you know if it had THC in it, or it was just a nicotine? Is that, or is it's not even that of this?
No, I think you'd have to do a field test, and you probably even have to go beyond a field test. It have to be seized, probably sent to a lab to really see what's in it. As they said, some of these stuff is bought overseas. You don't even know what you're inhaling or the purity of it. So it's quite, it could be quite dangerous.
Right. So I guess there's always been a percentage of smokers in schools, even when we went, and there was a percentage of people that smoke pot, whatever that number was. And, I got to imagine it's probably still very close to that number, as the economy grows or moves up forward, and those groups of people. So if, it's 5% smokers and 2%, or are we seeing a growing trend, I guess? Do we know that?
We do a drug and alcohol survey every year, and we share, our schools look at that information with their Safe School Climate Committee as we look at it. It is safe to say we're seeing a dramatic increase in vaping. As far as overall marijuana and everything else, that's actually stable. People think that's skyrocketing, but it's been stable or down over the past few years, both here and nationally, which is counterintuitive to what people would think.
So I'm curious in terms of, because I like that idea with that PowerPoint for the teachers. it is, and perhaps it is, something like that can be developed for parents? And if so, like how often during the school year would you do something like that?
Yeah, that's one of actually the things that we're going to be working on, is then working with the PTOs at the schools, not only the high schools, but also the middle schools, so that there is an awareness there as well for parents.
That's what I was getting at, because you want to get to the younger student before they even get to the high school, so that they're aware and they have an idea, especially nobody in our district, but if an older student happens to say, would you try it? And out of curiosity, they know enough to say no.
Of course.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much,
Thank
gentlemen.
you.
Great presentation. So up next is Mr. Rick Ledwith with the personnel report.
Good evening, everyone. The personnel report, as you can see, can be found on pages 7, 8, and 9 of your board packet. This is one of our larger reports of the year, as it indicates our retirements and resignations that we get towards the end of the school year, heading into the summer. And in this month's report, in our final report, you can see we have 15 retirements outlined in this report. And actually, this was published last Thursday. We actually received 2 more retirements since we published it, so we're up to 17. And we may get another retirement or 2 as we finish up the school year. So with the additional 14 resignations, that would put us at a turnover rate of right now at about 3%. And typically when we head into the summer, we'll lose some teachers who will decide to relocate. And in the fall, I'll give you a final number, but we typically end up at around 5% over the last several years. You can also see that we've hired 3 certified teachers for the 18-19 school year. And with those 17 retirements and 14 resignations, we are actually doing a ton of interviewing right now, mostly in our middle schools and high schools, and we will be hiring about 25 additional teachers over the next 2 weeks. So we're pretty busy out there in the schools and within the Human Resources Department. A lot of those folks are folks that we met through our teacher career fair that we had back in April, as well as the Yukon Fair, the Central Fair, and the Correct Minority Teacher Career Fair that was also held in April. So between those 4 school career fairs, we ended up with quite a pool of candidates to choose from this year. In terms of our administrative openings, we still are in the process of filling the hall assistant principal position. We actually invited about 100 of those folks to our career fair back in April, and we had about 6 or 7 administrators, both from Conard, Hall, and from central office, who assisted us in screening through those candidates. And we identified 14 individuals that we brought forward for interviews last week. And that committee identified 4 individuals that we will move forward for a 3rd round of interviews next week. And from there, ideally, that committee will identify 2 finalists that will move forward to the executive team during the last week of May. So we will be on track to make an announcement for the Hall AP position by that first week in June, probably by our first board meeting, ideally June 5th. I know our superintendent communicated with you yesterday, last night, or maybe even today. Last night at the Berlin Board of Education meeting, they announced that Eileen Eustace will be their new principal at Berlin High School. Eileen is an assistant principal at Conard High School. She's been here since, only 2016, so she's only been here 2 years, but for me, and I can speak on behalf of a lot of people, I feel like it's been a lot longer than that. As someone whose leadership and values and the way she carries herself is aligned with Conard High School and us at West Hartford Public Schools. So it certainly will be a loss for Conard and for Julio and his administrative team, but certainly is a gain for Berlin High School. So we wish Eileen all the best in her new professional role. But that leaves us with an opening. So we will post that position tomorrow. And coming off the heels of the Hall recruitment, we identified a number of people through that process as well who could be good fits for Conard. So we will have no issues filling that role. it may not happen until we'll post it tomorrow and go through that normal recruitment and interview process. So it may be towards the end of June by the time we fill that position. But we'll certainly keep you up to date as we move through the next few weeks. So that summarizes where we are right now as we head into the last few weeks of school and into the summer. But I'd be happy to answer any questions that the board had.
Mark?
You know, I don't want to talk about hiring practices, but I know, you know, hiring is time consuming and a lot of resources take place, and, you know, it's actually a line item usually on a civilian side of the world, you know, how much it costs to hire a new employee and such, and the amount of time it takes. So, and I know that Conard and Hall are very different, you know, they're different, but yet similar as well. And if you had two great candidates right now, and you have two assistant principal positions open, would it ever make sense to hire both? Because you already have that candidate in the pipeline versus having to restart the whole hiring process again. And I obviously this is.
Who gets first choice?
Huh?
Who gets first choice?
Listen, you know, Hall had the first opening position.
No, I say it facetiously in terms of, I understand what you're saying, and there actually have been cases where we've had principal openings and we've actually moved forward pretty much with that one person clearly being a good fit. So I think it's one of those things that one of the most important things at a high school with the assistant principal and the is that the staff has to buy in with that person. They have to have vetted the person. Oftentimes the top 2 or 3 candidates are the same top 2 or 3 candidates. So I understand what you're saying, but in terms of those early rounds, while it is a chore, certainly Rick's office goes through things, as do the administrators. The teachers want to be a part of that process, as do the students. Typically have members of the PTO also on board with that. Because the fact is, the schools are both great schools. They both do things exceptionally well. But 2 pieces. One, the cultures aren't exactly the same. And you might want somebody that would help the culture or in one area. And the job description. So at Conard, the person that they're losing is a scheduling expert. I mean, just unbelievable scheduling. So they may not, but they may need more of a focus on that mechanical piece in terms of that part of the job being something that would drive that person forward. Whereas maybe at Hall, the person that left was more of the academic piece. So maybe they're looking more for the academic background in terms of evaluation and teacher push, that's not as important. You know, they're all important, and sometimes you get a rookie that you're teaching everything anyway, but they're such a superstar, you're like, we want to invest in that person. So I get what you're saying, and it sometimes works out really well, but not enough just to say, because then really what happens is I'm picking the assistant principal for the principal, and their career relies on that person too, so they've got to buy into it.
Yeah, in addition to that, sometimes if it had worked out this time where Eileen and John Guidry had both received their principalships at the same time, we can combine the process. So we'd have the Hall folks and the Conard folks working together through one interview process to identify their candidates. But to Tom's point, you get in, we do, and we've done it in the past, but you do get into a situation where sometimes you're fighting over that same person. And we do that at the elementary schools as well. So if we have a consistent opening among a few different schools, we'll have the principals work together and interview the same group of candidates at the same time to save some time. So we are actually talked a little bit to Julio this evening about him sitting in on the Hall process next week, so he can take a look at these 4 finalists to see if, you know, if one of them is perfect for Hall, maybe one of the other 3 might be a good match for Conard. So we'll when we can, we try to do things like that. No, you don't vote on it. No, yeah, you just receive it. Huh? You vote on the non-tenure. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Rick.
You're welcome.
Just as before you move on to just a quick little report, both schools are back up. So if anybody was hoping, at 7:44 they were both back up.
Okay, next agenda item, routine matters. So may I have a motion to approve the minutes of the May 1st regular Board of Education meeting?
So moved.
Second,
Second.
discussion. Were there any corrections? I didn't see any. Did anybody see? Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Information and reports. Do any board members have any communications and reports? I believe Dave has something.
Hey, you better believe it, I got something, and I've been chomping at the bit here. So I called Tom and said that I need to talk about essentially Ellington, because I had the honor of attending and seeing the Hall Concert Jazz Band perform at Lincoln Center. I'd never been to Lincoln Center before. I was excited just to be there. And these guys were on the stage. Let me tell you, I happened just because work went a little late and traffic and all. I arrived in the theater just when the band before Hall was playing their last song. So timing worked out great, and then I got to see 3 other schools after them perform. They were just wonderful, and you know, this is a competition. Let me tell you how it works. They provide a number of pieces of music, and schools can choose which songs they'd like to perform. They record that and send it in, and it's a blind admission process, blind selection process. The judges don't know who they're listening to. And of all the schools that entered, they chose 15, and William H. Hall Concert Jazz Band was one of them. And right there, that in and of itself, making the cut, is something that all of West Hartford can take pride in, that accomplishment. It's outstanding. Now, this is reading from the website. This is a free program. There's no registration fee, so that's just great news right there. But what they got from it, they got an in-school workshop where a musician came and worked with the kids here at school. And then they spent 3 days in New York City, immersed in workshops, jam sessions, rehearsals, and performances. They got feedback from the judges, including Wynton Marsalis, which is just unbelievable right there. It's very exciting. You may know my day, I played tuba and trombone, and my claim to fame is I marched in the Rose Parade twice. And so but this is up there, okay? Yeah, it's just amazing. Now let's talk about there were 15 bands that performed, and of those they chose the top 3 bands. Of those 3 bands, unfortunately one of them wasn't Hall this year. But I tell you what, they're going to give it another shot. But of the top bands, one was a community band. Think of a group like maybe from the Hart School here. Just the top musicians in the area. Another one of the winners was a New York City metro area prep school, a private school. And then another one was a performing arts high school. Those were the top bands. And here we are, just like we were talking about, where we rank in U.S. News and World Reports, a comprehensive high school, and just the kids who work or who live in that area, that part of town, who work hard, who've grown up in the schools and gone through the music program. And this is a credit to the elementary schools as well, because they start in 3rd grade, you choose your instrument for 4th grade, and you're practicing and working, and they put in a lot of time over the years to get to this level. Just so exciting, and a real, credit to everyone who worked so hard and helped them get to where they are. Now, my hope, and I think for all of us here, this is West Hartford, and we hope that our students will not look back at this as the time I played at Lincoln Center, but I hope that they'll look back at this is the first time I played at Lincoln Center. And we can say that because the director, Jim Antonucci, actually performed as a high school student in the same competition back in the 90s. And now he was able to bring his band here, and that's just a great story and another great hire. Okay, so keep it up. Congratulations to Hall and all the award winners. It's just a remarkable achievement.
Yes, pardon me, my mother hat is always on. I just must give a shout out to my daughter Juliana. Happy 10th birthday today.
I'll second that.
So is Jazz. Dave, you should have arranged that.
Deb?
I'm the board liaison to the WHC-TV Board of Directors, and so I wanted to let everybody know that there is an upcoming fundraiser. It's actually a 5K fundraiser. It's on June 2nd from 9 to 11. You're all invited. The cost is $20 for everybody over the age of 13. People under 13 and all dogs can participate for free. And it's going to happen here in town, of course, with a big party at Blueback afterwards. And would love to have your participation. You can get more information on the WHC-TV website.
I just want to give a big shout out to the Sedgwick office staff. I had the pleasure of visiting the office last Friday, and I got to tell you, I was really impressed. That is money well spent. That's a great investment. It's interesting because when my girls went to Sedgwick, we would enter from the Sedgwick side. And so it was really convenient to enter on that side there. And then when you go in, the big pretty glass is right there and the office sees you in great colors. So I just want to say thank you, staff, and you were most gracious. And just keep up the good work. Since our students are home studying, we will move forward to future business. Announcement of future meeting dates. Tuesday, June 5th will be our regular Board of Education meeting at 7 p.m. here in Town Hall at 50 South Main Street, Legislative Chamber, Room 314, and that will be our final meeting for the year. Do we have a request for any future agenda items?
Well, I just wanted to remind folks that it's at the June 5th meeting that we'll be discussing the school start time issue. And I think the process, and somebody correct me if I don't get this exactly 100% correct, I think the process is that the board will be asking the administration to put together some frameworks for, at least one framework and potentially 2 or 3 frameworks for changing school start times. So we would have an idea of what would happen with transportation, with sports, with the before and after school programs, et cetera. The administration would have several months to put those together, and then the board will consider those in the fall and potentially vote on one of those options for the following school year.
That's correct. I understand that as well.
So I would just encourage people, if they still have thoughts on this, to share those thoughts with us before June 5th.
And with the great group that we have left, do we have any comments from visitors? Hearing none, and we have no executive session, may I have a motion to adjourn? So moved. Second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye.